right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our final session of the Odyssey Book Club. It's actually just incredible to see how many people are on this call and so special to get to read this poem with all of you from start to finish. So thank you for being here tonight, and thank you for showing up each night with such energy and bringing your thoughts and your support. It's just really been wonderful. So don't want to take too long, but I am happy to announce that we actually do have some other book groups in the works. So stay tuned for those. More on that coming out later. So, our quick summary, you might remember that last time in book 19, Penelope had decided that it was time to hold a contest so that the suitors could vie for her hand in marriage. Now, in book 21, that contest begins. So each suitor, and actually even Telemachus, try their hand at stringing Odysseus's bow and shooting an arrow through a series of axes. None of the suitors is even able to string the bow, and while they're working out different tricks to make it happen, Odysseus reveals his identity to and makes an alliance with Eumaeus and Philœtius. And then, despite the suitor's protests, he tries his hand at it and effortlessly strings the bow and sends an arrow soaring through the axes. Violent vengeance ensues in book 22. Using his bow and arrow, he kills Antinous first, and then, together with his allies, most importantly, his sons Telemachus and his goddess mentor, Athena, he kills all of the suitors. He spares no one except for the messenger Medon and the bard Phemius. Eurycleia then identifies all of the enslaved women that supported the suitors in his absence. Odysseus orders them to clean up the gore and the bodies, and Telemachus hangs the women. They purify the house with sulfur and call on the remaining servant women to come. And as these women embrace Odysseus, he suddenly wants to cry. While all this slaughter has been occurring, Penelope has been asleep. And in book 23, Eurycleia goes to her to tell her that Odysseus has returned. At first, Penelope keeps her distance from Odysseus, but she tests him by getting him to reveal a secret about their marriage bed that only he and a servant would know, that their bed is built into an olive tree. And once she's sure that the stranger is in fact her husband, she embraces him, and the two share stories of what they experienced while they've been apart. Meanwhile, Telemachus and the others dress up as if they were at a wedding to conceal the fact that all this slaughter has occurred in the household. In book 24, Hermes leads the souls of the suitors to the underworld. And there we see one of them, Amphimedon, meeting with Agamemnon and telling him about how he wooed Penelope, how faithful she was, and how Odysseus wrought his vengeance when he returned. Meanwhile, Odysseus reunites with his father in the farmland, at first testing him by pretending to be someone else, and then himself getting tested when Laertes causes him to reveal his true identity by naming all of the trees that his father gave him when he was a child. Then Laertes, Telemachus, and Odysseus, the three generations of the household, fight the relatives of the suitors. Tremendous violence would have ensued here, but Athena and Zeus intervene, and they cause both sides to swear a pact for peace that would last for eternity. So we've come to the end of the poem, and in true Homeric fashion, we have a bit of ring composition because we're lucky to welcome back Professor Leslie Kurke to join us in discussion. She was here with us for our first two conversations. Professor Kurke is the Gladys Ray Hardwood Distinguished Professor of Ancient Greek and Roman Studies and Comparative Literature. She specializes in ancient Greek literature and cultural history with special emphasis on archaic Greek poetry and its social context, Herodotus and early prose, ancient Greek popular culture, and the interactions of performed poetry and architectural space. She has published 4 books and is currently working on her 5th on the politics of ancient Greek chorea, or choral song and dance. Professor Kurke has been reading the Odyssey with Berkeley students since 1990 and always feels that she learns something new from them about this amazing poem when she does so. Likewise, she wants to thank all the members of this book club for their enthusiasm and participation. It's been a joy to go on this journey with you all, and I truly could not agree more. So thank you, Professor Kurke, tongue twister, for being here with us tonight, for helping us close the loop on this poem. You led us into it, so I'm excited to turn over the floor to you to have you help us wrap it up.
Thanks, Cecily. Honestly, it's kind of impossible. There's too much to talk about, especially, I think, in books 21 to 24 of the poem. And Cecily's already done a great plot, reminder of what happens. I'm going to go through that very quickly again in book 21. Of course, the contest of the bow with this complex orchestration of how Odysseus gets his hands on the bow. Lots of interesting stuff on class issues, gender, elite competition. Book 22, the killing of the suitor, a very Iliadic sequence in the poem. Book 23, the confrontation of Odysseus and Penelope testing Odysseus. And this is one thing I'd like to focus on tonight. On page 432 in the Mendelssohn translation at line 296, we know that the ancient Hellenistic scholars said, oh, this is the telos, or the peros of the poem, the end point of the poem, or its limit. That is, and we don't know whether they meant literally the poem should end with Odysseus and Penelope in bed together, which of course is where we want it to end. Or they just thought, well, this is the telos, that is, this is like really what the whole poem has been leading toward. But that's a super interesting thing, because then the question becomes, what's going on in book 24? Having wound up with Penelope and Odysseus in bed, narrating their stories to each other, and Odysseus going through his whole narrative again quickly for Penelope, and Athena delaying dawn so they have time to go through all their stories together. It feels very satisfying to end there, but of course the poem doesn't. It goes on for another whole book. Book 24, which starts with this weird thing we call the little Naquia, little descent to the underworld with the shades of the suitors, Agamemnon narrating at some length the funeral of Achilles, when Achilles was killed in the Trojan War, then off to the country where Odysseus encounters his father, Laertes. To me, one of the most painful scenes in the whole poem. It's kind of excruciating how Odysseus treats his father in this sequence. And then the final battle with Odysseus kind of flanked heraldically by his son Telemachus and his father Laertes. Laertes gets to kill the father of the arch baddie Antinous. That's the one killing that happens here. It looks like there's going to be much more killing, but Athena shouts, stop. There's my cat again. Somebody said that in the chat, so there he is. Athena shouts, stop, but then there's this also very, very puzzling Odysseus's final leap. Even after Athena has said, stop, no more violence, Odysseus leaps in this very Iliadic way, as if he's going to kill them all. And so there's a question of what is going on at the end of this poem. Is that just a reversion to his Iliadic past, or what? So the things I want to really focus on in the time I have, and I don't have enough, I want to talk about book 23 and the bed trick. And then, as I say, think about book 24 and what all the parts of book 24 are doing after such an apparently satisfying end for us of Odysseus and Penelope in bed together, telling each other stories. So first, the bed trick. Okay, that is Penelope's testing of Odysseus in book 23. Now, to do this properly, I need to go all the way back to book 6. of the poem. And I did check with Duncan McCrae to ask him if he talked about this passage, but he said no. I want to look at a little bit at the end of Odysseus's first speech to the Princess Nausicaa when he's naked and supplicating her for some clothes and guidance to town. And at the end of that speech on page 162, if you're using Mendelssohn's translation, he says, "If you will give me some clothes, then may the gods grant you whatever your heart desires. May they grant you, unto you a husband and a house and oneness of mind, a worthy gift. For there's nothing as powerful or as great as when a husband and wife, united by oneness of mind in their thinking, keep their home together, a great bane to their enemies, a blessing on their friends, and their renown is on everyone's lips." Now, this thing that's translated by Mendelssohn very well as oneness of mind in these lines, and it comes up twice. This is both basically noun and verb forms both of the Greek word homophrosyne, which means like-mindedness, sharing the same mind, which is, as Odysseus articulates it here to Nausicaa, a kind of ideal of marriage. Now, given everything we know about, or will come to learn about Nausicaa and the Phaeacians, it becomes more and more clear that he couldn't possibly have that kind of homophrosyne, like-mindedness with Nausicaa, although the poem shamelessly flirts with the idea that he might be the stranger who's shipwrecked on Scheria and they get married. That's never going to happen, because remember, what the Phaeacians are good at is sailing, but also they're very good runners and dancers, and they like warm baths and bed. Whereas Odysseus, remember I said to you in the very first session, his name means trouble. Trouble. He's Mr. Trouble with a capital T. He causes trouble to everyone he meets, including the poor Phaeacians, actually, and he suffers trouble. He's pain. That's what his name means. So there's no homophrosyne there that would be possible between Odysseus and Nausicaa, but what but this is what Odysseus and Penelope share beyond all other characters in the poem. And what gets re-established between them in these last books of the Odyssey, even within a very rigidly gender hierarchical culture. And the evidence for that homophrosyne, that like-mindedness that they share, there's a lot of evidence for it, but one thing I want to talk about very quickly are the reverse gender similes for Odysseus and Penelope. And there are a number of these, but I'm just going to focus on two. One occurs in book 8, and somebody might have talked about this before. When Odysseus hears his own story narrated, it's a little complicated because he's requested that story. Sorry, somebody has a hand up, but I don't know. I mean, I just want to get through some stuff before I take questions. Is that okay? No, you have a hand up. I don't know what that means. In any
Yeah.
case, book
If there are
8,
questions, put them in the chat and we'll get back to them.
we'll get to them. In book 8, remember when the bard in Scheria, Demodocus, has sung the story of the Trojan horse, which is Odysseus's own scheme. Odysseus responds by weeping, and we have this amazing simile. This is on page 194, if you're using Mendelssohn's translation. So that was the song that was sung by the far-famed bard. But Odysseus dissolved into tears that drenched the cheeks beneath his lids, just as a woman would weep while embracing a beloved husband who, there before his city and his people, has fallen defending his town and his children from the day that will show no pity. When she sees him dying there, gasping his final breath, she collapses on top of him, shrieking loudly, while behind her the enemy thrashes her back and her shoulders with their spears, leading her into bondage to endure hard labor and grief. And a heart-wrenching anguish causes her cheeks to waste away. That's how those wrenching tears stream down under Odysseus's brow. So notice here, he's compared to a woman, not just to a woman, but a woman whose husband has been killed in war, and she is being led off into slavery by the successful side. So in every way, the opposite, in a sense, of Odysseus, who was the winner, so-called, in the Trojan War, though in a sense, the message of the poem is there are no winners in war. So he is identified with this female position, whereas, and as I say, there are a number of these reverse gender similes. The other one I want to look at for Penelope is on page 365. This is in book 19, when Odysseus in disguise, and Penelope have this long colloquy by the fire late at night, with the maidservants, of course, listening in. So it all has to be a kind of coded exchange. In any case, in that context, Odysseus, in disguise, the first thing he says to Penelope is, page 365, "Lady, there is no mortal upon the boundless earth who could compete with you, for your fame has reached broad heaven, just like the fame of some king who is faultless, a God-fearing man, who, ruling like a lord over many and mighty men, upholds the ways of righteousness, and the black earth brings forth wheat and barley both, and the trees are heavy with fruit, and the flocks never stop bearing young, and the sea yields its fish, all through his good governance, as the people thrive under him. So here in your house, you may question me." Notice he's comparing her to a good king. Again, reverse gender, but of course we know that Odysseus is the good king from the assembly in book 2, where he's said to be the good king who is gentle like a father to his people. So they each get identified with the other position, even flipping the genders. Now, okay, now back to book 23. And here I don't have time even to talk about an issue which exercises scholars a lot, which is, what does Penelope know and when does she know it? Okay, like some scholars think Penelope already knows it's Odysseus in book 19, because why else would she decide to set up the bow trick? Whereas other scholars think she has no idea and she's just kind of being manipulated by fate or Athena or Odysseus or whatever. And a third group of scholars think she kind of knows subconsciously but doesn't really know. So this is very, very complicated, and I'm not going to talk about that, sorry. But I do want to talk about what happens after Odysseus kills all the suitors and Euryclea comes to get Penelope and to bring her downstairs, and she's very skeptical, and she holds back from Odysseus, remembers, so that she's actually reproached by Telemachus for holding back and being so hard-hearted, and again reproached by Odysseus. This is on page 426 and 428 if you're using the Mendelssohn translation. But we also have to take seriously what Penelope says here, that she is genuinely worried that this stranger may be a god in disguise. That is a real worry in the world of the poem. She says this on page 425, because after all, the fact that as one man he has managed to kill by himself 108 suitors is miraculous and unexpected. So this is a real worry. Or that he could be an imposter. And for this, you might think of that old movie, The Return of Martin Guerre. You know, that somebody comes back from war and has the whole story from the husband and worms his way into the wife's bed, right? This is a real worry. So Penelope, as I say, holds back on pages 425 to 428, even though she's reproached by Telemachus and then again by Odysseus. And here I would say even her restraint, her hardness, right? She's compared to steel or iron, echoes or rhymes with Odysseus's own. This is a quality that he has too, and this is characteristic of their homophrosyne, their like-mindedness. And then we get the bed trick, right, on pages 428 to 429, where Penelope says, to Telemachus, we have secret signs, your father and I. I was just reading some scholarship on this, and one scholar wonderfully says, this is the moment where she says to Telemachus, stay out of your parents' bedroom, right? Like this is every child has to be told this. That there are things that are private in your parents' bedroom that you can't know about, essentially, is what she's saying to him. In any case, so they have secret signs, semata. And then remember, Odysseus gets a little huffy and says, "Oh, make me up a bed outside." And Penelope says, "Yes, move the bed outside and make it up for him." And then remember, Odysseus loses it. He gets angry. His self-control actually fails him on page 428. Now, it turns out then that Penelope is the only human character in the poem who is able to outwit Odysseus, right? She has metis, this same quality of cunning intelligence, in abundance, and this is how she tricks him. But that's also what proves that they're perfectly suited for each other. Odysseus, whose epithet is polyumetis, she's a perfect match for him. She even outdoes him and tricks him with metis. And one point that another scholar, Jack Winkler, has made is in your reading experience, you as a reader or listener are also tricked, right? You're reading along and you're not warned about the bed trick. Just suddenly, Odysseus is really angry, right? We experience it just as Odysseus does. It's a surprise to us, which is, a fantastic thing about the poem. And then there's this question, which I always pose to my undergraduates. I give them this as a reading question. Why does Odysseus get so mad? What's he so angry about, right? Well, remember the secret sign of the bed, only the two of them and one female slave know the secret of the bed. And so for the bed to be movable, that means another man has been in his bedroom and cut the trunk of the tree that is still rooted in the earth. How can the bed be movable? Right? So in practical terms, it means that another man has been in the bedroom. This is, of course, untrue, but this is how Penelope tricks him. The bed is rooted in the earth, right? It's a living olive tree, still living olive tree. And as such, it's also a symbol of Penelope's fidelity and her chastity, right? A living olive tree. He builds the bedchamber around the olive tree. He builds the house around the bed at the center, absolutely fixed in the earth, unmovable and completely secret, is the bed, right? Which symbolizes the marriage, which symbolizes Penelope's chastity. There's also my friend Carol Doherty has a great book on this where she's very interested in the upright of Odysseus's mast, the upright of Penelope's loom, and the upright of the bed post, which is the olive tree still rooted in the earth, right? So these things that are all linked to each other and all connected. And then, having said all that, then I just want to call your attention to one last simile, which completes this pattern of the reverse gender similes. This one is on page 430. Okay, so we're told she finally says, "Oh, it's you. I realize it's you now because you know this thing about the bed." And at the top of page 430, her words, "And the urge to sob stole over him even more. He wept as he held his wife, heart of his heart, whose thoughts were so true. Just as the sight of land is welcome to swimmers at sea, whose well-built ship Poseidon has splintered upon the ocean as it's driven on ahead by the wind and the surging waves. A few of them have escaped onto land from the iron gray sea by swimming, the crust of brine forming around their skin, and welcome sight. They tread on dry land after escaping from disaster. That's how welcome the sight of her husband was as she gazed upon him, nor could she bear to let his neck slip from her white arms. Okay, so here notice we have another reverse gender simile where Penelope experiences exactly what Odysseus has gone through, shipwreck and being washed up, covered with crusted salt in Phaeacia, right? So again, they share each other's experiences, even across genders in the simile. But the reason I love this simile is it's even better than that. Notice that the simile starts as about Odysseus. It's about him, right? And the urge to sob stole over him even more. But we come out of the simile, that's how welcome the sight of her husband was as she gazed upon him. Now nor could she bear to let his neck slip from her white arms. That is to say, not only is this a reverse gender simile, but their two consciousnesses are fused or merged in the space of the simile. And that's the final kind of poetic representation of this perfect homophrosune, this like-mindedness that they have in the poem. So that's mainly what I had wanted to talk about in book 23. It's impossible to kind of get to the bottom of this whole thing about the bed and the rooting of the bed at the center of the house, at the center of the bedroom, and all of that. But I'll just leave you with that. You can keep pondering that on your own. And so now I do want to talk very quickly about book 24. Yeah, Mendelssohn is good on the reverse simile, but he doesn't point out to you, I see this in the chat, the thing about the sort of merging of consciousness in it. He has a nice note on this simile, but this is the thing that is really amazing about it. Okay, book 24. So what is book 24 doing? Why does the poem end this way? Remember what I said to you about Hellenistic scholars really wanting it to end with the two of them in bed, as basically we do. Like, we could lay money on this. Do we think that the Chris Nolan movie is going to end with them in bed? I bet it will. Okay. But I'm not putting money on that. Sorry, but I raised that question. So what is it that book 24 accomplishes? What does it give us that we wouldn't have if the poem ended with the couple in bed? And here, as I say, there are three main parts of book 24. First, this the shades of the underworld, the little Naquia, where the ghosts of the suitors go gibbering like bats down to the underworld, of another famous, amazing Homeric simile, comparing them to bats squeaking. And here, actually, I had a great question. There was a great question from Despina. And Mendelssohn actually has very good footnotes on this part. That is, it's important that the Iliad, the first book of the Iliad, starts with a fight between Agamemnon, the great king, and Achilles, the best warrior. Whereas here in book 24, we see them reconciled and kind of praising each other and very amicably chatting in the underworld, right? That's one thing. So there's a kind of resolution that this last book of the Odyssey provides for the Iliad. In addition, of course, Agamemnon then offers us a very long, full account of the burial of Achilles, which is another way of responding to and resolving the plot of the Iliad. Because, of course, the Iliad ends, we never see the death of Achilles in the Iliad. The Iliad ends, book 23, the burial of Patroclus, Achilles' beloved friend. Book 24, the burial of Hector, is really the very end of the Iliad. So the burial of Achilles, narrated in book 24 of the Odyssey, responds and completes those two funerals at the end of the Iliad, especially because, of course, we're told that the bones of Achilles and Patroclus are buried together. So it picks up and completes those funerals from book 23 and book 24 of the Iliad. I actually love this narrative of the funeral of Achilles because it's like the ultimate heroic funeral, right? The muses sing at his funeral. Everything is so cosmic and over the top, right? The 50 Nereids come out of the sea and wail for Achilles, and the Greek army is terrified. This is such an uncanny noise that they all want to run away. And Nestor has to say to them, no, 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 it's just his mother and her 50 sisters mourning. So just like everything is so extreme in the burial of Achilles. So essentially, this is also to lay the ghosts of the Iliad. Here we are at the end of the Odyssey after 20 years. He's finally made it home. He's finally passed this world of war, but it's taken a really long time. And here we finally lay to rest the ghosts of the Iliad, I'd say. Then we have Odysseus's reunion with his father Laertes. This is pages 441 to 445, if you're reading Mendelssohn's translation, which, as I've already said, I always find one of the most painful scenes in this poem, because Odysseus debates with himself. Should he just go up and say, hey, I'm home, great to see you, and hug his father and kiss him, or should he torture him? And decides, no, I'll torture him for a while. So the first thing he says to Laertes is he acts as if he thinks he's a slave. Why doesn't your master give you better clothes? Because you obviously work really hard. Your orchard looks great, but you look terrible. Okay. And he has a long lying tale that he tells Laertes about how he hosted Odysseus 5 years ago and gave him all these gifts, and he's hoping to see Odysseus, and Laertes breaks down in tears, and at that moment even Odysseus can't take it anymore, right? And there's that amazing thing about the pain and the grief comes up through his nostrils. I mean, it's just physical, and he finally reveals himself to his father. So why torture his father is a real question. I must say, I like Mendelssohn and I really like his notes. I think they're really super helpful, but Mendelssohn has a more positive version of the poem, and especially of Odysseus, than I do, I think. So he says, oh, some scholars think that he's just like working up to it with Laertes, because if he just revealed himself too suddenly, it would just be too much for Laertes, and Laertes would faint, which of course he does when he finally reveals himself. But I don't know. I don't quite believe that. It's like the old, do you know this old joke about how, oh, it's too long to tell. I won't tell this joke, never mind. I don't believe that. But if you ask me, because I've like spent a long time worrying about why does he torture his father, I think Odysseus is punishing him because Laertes has absented himself. Part of the reason that Ithaca has been in chaos for 20 years is because Laertes wasn't there to take charge, right? That's why Penelope has had to do it all alone. And I think, at whatever level, Odysseus is punishing him for that. That's why he pretends he's a slave, because he hasn't behaved like a king. He hasn't stepped up. There he is in the country, in an orchard. His clothes are disgusting. He sleeps out on the ground. He just completely abdicated authority. So, to me, there's a real, I don't know, there's a real familial truth in this sequence of how complicated issues are between parents and children. But it is a real question. And then, of course, the recognition tokens with Laertes. First, the scar, which he's used with several other people, with Eumaeus and with Philœtius. Eurycleia recognizes the scar, but in this context, the scar symbolizes Odysseus's own initiation, his coming of age through the boar hunt. Whereas then also the trees in the orchard, because Laertes tests him in response and asks him about the trees in the orchard. And of course, Odysseus knows all the trees in the orchard because Laertes gave him the trees when he was a boy. But I love the image of the trees in the orchard being about lineage, right? About the unbroken chain of father and son. And the living trees in the orchard, like the living tree of the bed, that binds him to Laertes. So there's something just amazing, I think, of the image of like their reunion through the trees in the orchard, which again, I think is one of those like not the meaning in the poem that is so rich. I can't take you to the bottom of it, but it's something to keep thinking about. And then finally, this final crazy battle scene of the Odyssey, right? Um, Part of it is Laertes gets rejuvenated and reintegrated after having just abdicated and been like a slave on the land. He becomes a warrior, he dresses in armor. Athena rejuvenates him and breathes Menos strength into him, and so he gets to kill Eupeithes, the father of Antinous, the arch baddie of the suitors, right? And the father who is the leader. Um, but there's something much more complicated going on in this last sequence, because this last sequence, and this is again part of Despina's question, that both the Iliad and the Odyssey end with reconciliation and resolution. And is that correct? And at one level, yes, that's correct. But I also think there's a profound difference, because the reconciliation at the end of the Iliad is just this very little temporary, impossible community that's constructed between enemies at the end of the Iliad in the midst of war, because the war is still ongoing. It hasn't ended. There's just this brief moment when Achilles and Priam can meet each other, and Achilles can return the dead body of Hector to his father Priam. Whereas the reconciliation at the end of the Odyssey, this is essential because this is violence within a community, right? Odysseus has killed all the best young men of Ithaca and the neighboring islands, 108 of them. He has killed them all, but these are his own people. This is different, and this is going to be a permanent reconciliation. So the question really is how you get out of a kind of endless cycle of violence. And this is why I think it's great, Despina, that you think about it together with the end of the Oresteia, where again, Athena intervenes to end this kind of endless cycle of violence. But this is, in a sense, it's about civil war and how you avoid civil war and how you can come to peace. And it's actually an amazing fact that I didn't know before. But when Athena turns to Zeus at the end and says, "Oh, what should we do now?" He's like, "Well, you planned this all along. Just go ahead." He says it should be this way. They should not kill each other. They should swear oaths. And Odysseus should be king forever. And then there will be wealth and peace among them. Plutos and Eirene. This is actually the one and only occurrence of the word for peace in the whole Odyssey. Only here, right? When Zeus says, "Let there be wealth and peace, let them." And he also says this, he uses this amazing word that only occurs here, eklesis, let there be forgetting of the death of their sons and their brothers, which is what's essential for making peace within the community. It's essentially about state formation and finding a way to get past internecine violence and civil war. And that's what it's going to be. Zeus decrees it, right? Athena enforces it. So that's a different kind of reconciliation. I think we move way beyond the Iliad, which is like permanent war, to finding a way to get to peace and the end of violence. But given all that, what the hell is Odysseus doing at the end with this leap at the end? Okay, people say, oh, he's kind of just reverting to his Iliadic self. It's just a habit, is one way of reading it, right? So I saw I've just been reading a scholar who's generally quite good saying, oh, this is what Borgia talks about as the kind of residue of habit, even when it doesn't fit with the external surroundings. I actually think it's more complicated than that. I think that after spending the whole last 12 books testing his son, Eumaeus, Philoetius, Penelope, his father, here Odysseus knows it's Athena when she appears in disguise as Mentes. Um, and he's essentially, with that final leap, even after she said, stop, no killing, stop, Odysseus is testing the whole cosmos, is testing not just Athena, but Zeus himself, who has to hurl down a thunderbolt at the feet of Athena to stop him. That is, Zeus has to ratify with his thunderbolt this peace, these oaths, and that this is going to be forever. But it's like the last turn of Odysseus, who is Polytropos, who's much turning, who tests everybody, that he can test even the gods and make them like give him the sign that ratifies this final peace. That's my theory of the end of the Odyssey, but you won't hear that from anybody else. So I think I'm out of time. That's what I had wanted to say anyway, but I'm happy to take questions.
Yeah, that was fantastic. I'm totally convinced about Odysseus's anger towards Laertes. I hadn't thought about that aspect, but I think it totally, yeah, it makes Odysseus's beggar disguise make a little more sense too,
Yeah.
that he's operating in a different model.
Yes. And
Where he,
I said this to Nellie, and Nellie said, Nellie Oliensis, and she said, but of course, Laertes also couldn't step back into that role because only Odysseus can only be king if Laertes has withdrawn. So it's a kind of impossible situation, but this again seems to me to be very true to families.
yeah,
Even if it couldn't have worked, he's still mad at him,
right,
right?
right. So if you have questions, pop them in the chat. You know, we have a lot to think about.
Yeah. Yeah, I love the end of the Odyssey. I love
Yeah,
book 24 because it's so crazy.
it's unexpected every time.
Yeah, that's right.
But, um,
Oh, so I do see a question. How could Odysseus be king if Laertes was still alive? Well, this means long ago Laertes deliberately withdrew and ceded the kingship to Odysseus, which is why Nellie said to me, well, it's impossible for Laertes to step back in. And this is also, people are actually very interested in the figure of Telemachus, because Telemachus is kind of stuck as well. I mean, the end of the Odyssey is so interesting because it's this kind of, as I said, heraldic flanking of Odysseus by Telemachus and Laertes. But Telemachus has nowhere to go, right? There's this way in which the first four books, the Telemachy, I love the Telemachy, and I talked about those the first time, is all about his coming to manhood, his journey and his maturation. But as scholars say, there's still nowhere for him to go as long as Odysseus is, the vigorous king figure. And Odysseus is not going to step back as Laertes had done for him. Zeus says, let him be king forever. So there's nowhere for Telemachus, really. That's
Mm.
another very weird thing about the end of the poem for Telemachus.
Well, the great scene where Odysseus just nods his head no. You can't shoot
Right.
the
I mean, it's
bow.
so
Yeah.
interesting because it's clear that Telemachus would have strung the bow, right? And that's 3 times he tried, and the fourth time he would have, is exactly the formulaic structure you get for Patroclus attacking the walls of Troy,
Right.
right? 3 times he attacks, and the fourth time he would have mounted the walls if Apollo had not hit him down and said, "This is beyond fate." So Telemachus clearly could have strung the bow. That proves he's his father's son, but he's not allowed to. I mean, it's also a crazy Oedipal moment because it means he would win his own mother,
Right.
right, for marriage, but like that can't happen either.
No. I am seeing some questions here. Um, One of them from Lipka is about violence and the limits of violence and
Mm.
about it's I'm interested in the housemaids and the gender aspects here. I don't know if there's anything to comment on with that.
Yeah,
Um,
obviously, violence has been an issue for the end of the Odyssey. And there was a question I saw earlier of someone saying, why does he have to kill all the suitors? Couldn't he just show mercy? And there, I do have to say, I'm always struck when I reread it how much Athena wants him to kill all the suitors,
mhm,
right? I mean, Athena really wants him to kill all the suitors, and there's one poor guy who's even going to leave, and she keeps restrains him
mhm,
so that Odysseus can kill him. But also, that scene where she comes in disguise as Mentor and they threaten her with horrible things. After he's already started killing them, they say, "Oh, if you're going to help him, we will kill you and we will
mhm.
kill your whole family and we will take your land," and all this stuff. I mean, so the other thing I think is that everything in the poem is set up to make the suitors so bad, so wicked and
Mhm.
impious, and violating all the rules of society and respect for the gods, that we kind of want them all to get killed, right? It's like a modern revenge movie. I mean, come on, when we see those movies like Die Hard or whatever, I don't know, all those Mission Impossible or whatever, right? You 007, right? You want all the bad guys to get killed. You're rooting
Right.
for it. So I don't think, I mean, we shouldn't kid ourselves. Yeah, this is also a piece of popular entertainment. And yeah, they're all going to get killed. There's no question of mercy. I mean, there's mercy. He spares the herald and the bard because they did their jobs under duress. And
Right.
the herald actually, was on Penelope and Telemachus' side. So I just think we have to accept that this is not a Christian culture. Mercy is not a value.
Mhm.
But at the same time, the poem has worked very hard to construct the suitors as so bad and wicked and shameful and just egregious that in the end the claim is, oh, they did it to themselves and they deserved everything they got. I mean, there's also a really interesting discussion by scholars, especially Michael Nagler, of how the killing of the suitors and our rooting for them all to be killed actually covers over the much more embarrassing fact that Odysseus lost all his men
Mhm. Mhm.
on the way home, who are not necessarily bad guys, honestly, but they get covered over by the suitors. So there is an amazing moment when Eupeithes in that little assembly in book 24 says he killed all the men, lost all the men he was on adventures with, and then he came home and killed a whole new generation.
Mhm.
And that is actually true,
Yeah.
right? He's wiped out 2 generations of his own community.
Mm.
And yet the poem is working very hard so that we think he's a great guy. And all this is right and as it should be.
Right.
Yeah, there's no denying that. And then, of course, the hanging of the maid servants. What's so interesting there is that Odysseus says, kill them with a sword. And
Mm-hmm.
Telemachus, on his own steam, decides that's too clean a death. They should
Mm.
they should have an even more shameful death than that. So he hangs them, which is this kind of adolescent. I mean, Mendelssohn says this as well, I think, in his footnotes, this sort of teenage acting out of aggression.
Mm.
But there is also a moment where Eurycleus says, well, 12 of the 50 slept with the suitors and they talked back to Penelope and they were incredibly mean to Telemachus the whole time he was growing up. And Penelope wouldn't ever let him boss the slaves around because he wasn't grown up yet.
Mm.
So you have to imagine a whole life of these women, heaping abuse on Telemachus.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, that's not pretty either. Again, this is not a Christian poem.
No.
This is a slave culture. It's incredibly violent. It's incredibly elitist. It's incredibly sexist.
No. But I think that helps to make sense of it, that it is sort of like his personal vengeance about
Yeah.
the way that they've displaced him. I think, yeah.
Yes. And also, 12 out of 50, it's not just like they sleep with the suitors, but they have betrayed the household.
Hmm.
They're the ones who turned in Penelope for the weaving trick. They're kind of
Right.
spies and a fifth column within the household
Hmm.
working for the suitors.
Right. I'm seeing a question here too from Francine that sort of goes back to the ending being about forgetting as part of constituting community
Yeah,
and how that relates to poems as records for posterity and how those two things play together.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. Well, yeah, no, that's a great question. It reminds me of the beginning of the Theogony.
mm,
Cecily, you'll know this passage that Hesiod says, the muses are the daughters of Mnemosyne, memory, and they accomplish lesmosune,
mm,
forgetfulness of pains. Right. And there's
right.
this little juxtaposition in two lines of nemos unane at the beginning of a line and lesmos unane at the beginning of the next line. But this is also the two interact, right? But also this thing about forgetting at the end of this poem, I had forgotten about it, and I think is so
Mm,
amazing. This word eklesis that only occurs here. It's a Homeric hapax. It
mm,
only occurs here. But later on in Athens, they have a civil war in 403, and at the end of it, they declare amnestia, that is, not remembering,
right.
because it's the only way they can get on together.
Mm,
After you have a civil war and you've killed each other, there has to be, you just declare forgetting. And that's how Athens survives and manages to go on as a state and as a democracy into the 4th century. The same thing here. How can Ithaca survive as a community? I mean, it really is a political question.
mhm.
But yeah, I mean, so there is always this kind of complicated dialectic or interaction of the poetry, which is the remembering, and
Right,
the politics of forgetting.
right. Yeah. I'm seeing here. Um, looks like there's a question about the status of the suitors and the comrades and what the kind of title of elite means. Um,
Yeah, for the suitors, it means they are, Well, we used to say aristocratic, but these days we try to avoid that term because it's a little anachronistic and suggests something like a hereditary aristocracy, like in England or, European countries, whereas we think that it was more fluid and more status claimed than really ascribed, right? So everyone was trying to be elite, but it at least requires wealth, education, good food, right? Training, um, something about birth. So that's the sense in which we mean elite, not like they're good guys or moral. They're just it's a class or status ranking within the culture, as opposed to the herdsmen who are slaves, actually, right?
Right.
Philoetius and Eumaeus are Odysseus's slaves. But then there are also low class people. Remember in book 11 when Achilles says, I'd rather be the meanest theat upon the land. That's
Mm,
a poor guy who doesn't have anything, doesn't even own his own land, but works for another. So there are all these um, social class status rankings,
mhm.
but have nothing to do with morality or
Right.
being a good person. That's not what we mean by elite in this culture.
Yeah. Well, I see that it is 6:30. So maybe it's time to go to the breakout rooms. But thank you all for being here. And thank you, Professor Kirk, for coming back and yeah, for helping us to understand what's happening at the end of this poem. It's
Yeah.
yeah, really very confusing. So thank you for being here and thank you all for participating throughout this spring. This has just been so wonderful and I hope you enjoy our final breakout sessions.